Hey, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Decolonized Dungeons & Dragons. All right, let's talk about it. Okay, so what is Decolonized Dungeons & Dragons? Well, Decolonized Dungeons & Dragons is a new thing. It has recently come up so it's very much a new thing. It has come up from D&D Twitter. All right, now what is D&D Twitter, right? Well, Twitter is an incredibly powerful platform. I mean, I don't need to tell you, man, like world leaders use it as their primary platform. Twitter in the last 5 years has become an absolute game changer as far as news, as far as distribution of information. It's an incredibly powerful, valuable platform. Okay, and I'm a Twitter user. You can check me out at JS Garibay on Twitter, and I am part of D&D Twitter. D&D Twitter is a community of people who really like Twitter and really like Dungeons & Dragons, right? And post quite frequently and have some really in-depth discussions about a ton of different topics related to Dungeons & Dragons on Twitter. Well, D&D Twitter recently birthed Decolonized D&D, right? Decolonized Dungeons & Dragons. So what is Decolonized Dungeons & Dragons? Well, one, it's absolutely fascinating, right? So before I even get into whether I like it or don't like it, or whether I think it's a good idea or a bad idea, let me just say it is fascinating, right? And you will find some incredible stuff you really can find some truly incredible stuff on D&D Twitter, right? And so Decolonized Twitter, Decolonized Dungeons & Dragons is the idea that we need to create a Dungeons & Dragons that is not a colonial Dungeons & Dragons, right? So why would we do that, right? Well, one of the reasons why we would consider doing this is understanding what colonization is. So one definition of colonization is a nation establishing and maintaining domination over a territory, right? Okay, so when you understand colonization through that definition, you're like, whoa, wait, that doesn't sound good, right? And a lot of people nowadays are saying, oh yeah, colonization is really, really bad, right? I have mixed feelings on that. I live in America. We're a colony, right? And it worked out really good for us, right? America's the most powerful country in the world right now, or I think we're clearly the wealthiest country in the world. Like, it worked out good for Americans, right? And I mean all Americans. Like, I feel like even people who are struggling in America have it better than many people in a lot of other nations who are developing, right? But I know this is a really, really complicated topic. Definitely not trying to make light of it, and I'm trying to understand it and proceed forward. So just understand I am trying to do a good job of moving forward with this conversation with due respect, right? So let me proceed. All right. So the idea is, and I will let you know my opinion on D&D, decolonized D&D before we're done. But we gotta get all the terms defined. All right. So let's actually get a good idea of what exactly it is, right? So colonized D&D is essentially the idea that Dungeons & Dragons has a base setting that really is set in 12th century medieval England, right? That's the base setting. You're adding magic in, you're adding dragons in, but you're really, when you're playing D&D, the base setting is really 12th century medieval England, right? Well, if that is the base setting, if we take that as granted, right? If we grant that D&D really does, and I will grant that, I think D&D really is basically set in 12th century medieval England, right? Well, if that's the case, then isn't Dungeons & Dragons celebrating a dominator? Isn't it celebrating English culture, who was a colonial dominator for like many centuries, right? If not a full millennium, right? Well, that's a really good question, right? So that's kind of what, the idea of decolonized D&D is saying, hey, right now we have colonized D&D, right? And the base setting is really celebrating English culture, which were colonial dominators, right? So that's where this need, right, that's the foundation of people who are saying we need a decolonized Dungeons & Dragons, right? So what would a decolonized Dungeons & Dragons be? Well, it would be a fantasy setting that is not fundamentally based in 12th century medieval England. It wouldn't really be, it could be 12th century, it could be medieval, but maybe in a country that wasn't a colonial dominator, right? And so that D&D then isn't seen to be celebrating colonial domination, right? Okay, that's the idea, right? So let's break this down piece by piece. Do we need a decolonized Dungeons and Dragons, right? So my first approach at answering this question is no, absolutely not. We already have it, right? There are at least 3 of them. I think that there's actually far more than that, but I can name 3 right off the top of my head, right? So one, the absolute best, in my opinion, decolonized Dungeons and Dragons that exists right now is Overlight, made by Renegade Games, right? They knocked it out of the frickin' park. It is a fantasy setting that has nothing to do with the 12th century, nothing to do with medieval times, and nothing to do with England. And it is colorful and brilliant and beautiful. It celebrates a whole lot of cultures, but it has a fantasy feel, right? It is pure baller. Like, I love that game. Overlight is one of my favorite games from last year. And I have a list of best games for 2018. You can find them right here on my channel. And you will find Overlight, like, I think on top of the list, right? Like, it's a great game. Here's another decolonized Dungeons and Dragons. That is Fragged Kingdom, which actually, ironically, comes out of England, right? You know what? Maybe I got to back that up. It's an international product. That's the best way to say it. So, might not be English, but it definitely comes from, I'm pretty sure it comes from Europe, okay? But it is 100%, I'm positive, it is an internationally sourced tabletop role-playing game, right? And so, with that said, Fragged Kingdom, same thing. Really strong fantasy tabletop role-playing game that is not fundamentally based in England, right? And it, and really is completely removed from that colonial dominator celebration, right? Here's one more. Alfheim. One of my favorite games is Index Card RPG. It's created by Hankrin Farinala. It's created by Runehammer Games. It is an absolutely amazing tabletop role-playing game. It's one of the very, very best that is available right now. I highly recommend it. And its setting is Alfheim. And Alfheim does a lot to remove 12th century medieval England, right? It really feels different. Its magic feels different. Its dragons feel different. It's just fun and like filled with cool stuff, and it really doesn't remind you of England, 12th century medieval England. It's awesome. So that's 3. So if you really, really, really want to play a decolonized Dungeons and Dragons, you got a lot of options, right? And I would bet that quite a few people listening to this podcast, this video, probably know even of a few more that are very, very good. All right, now, here's another question. Should we have a decolonized Dungeons and Dragons? In my opinion, 100% no, right? Now, here's why. I think I understand where people are coming at from with this desire to have a decolonized Dungeons and Dragons, right? And they want, this idea is coming from people who are progressive, right? They want to progress our politics, they want to progress our socialness, they want to progress our culture, right? I get that. That is a very noble goal, right? And so, now, I will say, a lot of times I'm like, J. Scott Garibay's right on this. I know this is a complex subject, so if you think I'm wrong, I really invite you to educate me, please. I'm ready and willing to hear and listen on this, okay? But here's my idea. I do not think we need a decolonized Dungeons and Dragons. I think we should not attempt to build a decolonized Dungeons and Dragons. And the reason why is, one, okay, Dungeons & Dragons is the flagship of the tabletop role-playing game industry. The entire industry's well-being is bound with wired cord to Dungeons & Dragons, right? So it's dangerous to mess around with Dungeons & Dragons because you can turn over the whole apple cart, right? Now, I will tell you right now, I think there's a Daggers Out war right now for the fate of Dungeons & Dragons 6th edition. And I have given many, many opinions on what should and should not be in Dungeons & Dragons 6th edition, right? So and this is one of the discussions, right? So we could have a decolonized Dungeons and Dragons in 6th edition. It's a bad idea, and we should not do this, and here is why, okay? So one, if you do a decolonized Dungeons and Dragons, what do you actually lose, right? Well, the biggest thing you're going to lose is Dungeons and Dragons, in my opinion, is systematized Tolkien. It is systematized J.R.R. Tolkien. Gary Gygax took J.R.R. Tolkien's world, did a very fresh skin of it. It's skinned, right? He didn't call people, hobbits, right? He didn't use Bilbo. He skinned it. That's legal. That's good, right? He skinned Tolkien's work, but he systematized Tolkien's work. You will find humans, elves, dwarves. You will find orcs, right? The magic works pretty much exactly the way it did in Tolkien, right? Tolkien is beloved. J.R.R. Tolkien, in my opinion, has created the best fantasy source that has ever existed it's better than, Homer's stupid Odyssey and the Iliad and all that crap. J.R.R. Tolkien knocked it out of the park. Nothing beats Tolkien's fantasy. Nothing, right? And D&D is based on J.R.R. Tolkien's fantasy. And because J.R.R. Tolkien's fantasy is so fundamentally, foundationally strong, right? You will find there's got to be at least 100,000 fantasy novels that have been written that you can read those books if you understand Tolkien. And if you don't understand Tolkien, you're probably not going to enjoy those books, right? Like, it's just too much of a foundation, right? I really feel that when you're looking at D&D, you're looking at its setting is really systematized Tolkien. So if you decolonize Dungeons & Dragons, what you are really ripping out is you are ripping out Tolkien, right? And frankly, here's my issue. I just don't have any confidence that anyone has better material than Tolkien, right? He wrote that stuff in the 40s, right? I read it in the 70s, and it changed my life, right? And it is still changing lives today. Now, I will absolutely hear you out. Point me to another fantasy series where someone wrote a book 60, 70, 80 years ago, or actually even recently, and just millions of people's lives are changed by the power of the narrative, right? I'm not sure you're going to be able to do it, right? Because just nothing beats Tolkien, right? So if you go with a decolonized D&D, you are ripping Tolkien out of Dungeons & Dragons, right? And you should have absolutely zero confidence that you're going to be able to replace it with something better, right? Because there's just no evidence to that. Now, here's the kicker. If you do it, right, what's going to happen is this gets back to Pathfinder, okay? If you mess with D&D and people reject it, all you're going to do is you are not going to create D&D, Dungeons & Dragons, will then become this shriveled mess, right? And then Pathfinder is either going to grow again, right? Or there's going to be a new Pathfinder. And this is my opinion. It's just my opinion. But in my opinion, I think that Pathfinder, we're looking at the 2nd edition of Pathfinder, right? And they just announced Jason Bowman just announced 3rd edition Pathfinder as an April Fool's joke. And I cannot tell you how passionately I detest April Fools, right? Oh, man, I hate that holiday. All right, so we're at 2nd edition Pathfinder, right? Now, here's the kicker, right? So what do we do with that, right? What do we do with 2nd edition Pathfinder? Here's the kicker. I think Pathfinder was a horrible diversion for the D&D community. Pathfinder, in my opinion, and I know this is a strong statement, is the greatest diversion and split and division of the Dungeons & Dragons community that's ever happened. And in my opinion, the Dungeons & Dragons game would not have 10 million players today. It might have 15 or 20 or 40 million players today if Pathfinder hadn't been in the way, sucking off a great number of creators, right, and players and game masters. I think, and reality is, if you decolonize D&D, right now, so everybody who wants decolonized D&D, hear me out, right? if you want decolonized D&D, think about what you're talking about. Right now, D&D is in the hands, okay, of progressives. There is a ton of progressive movement in the Dungeons and Dragons game. Political, cultural, social, identity issues, all kinds of stuff really are being quickly addressed in the game, right? And now I know it's not quick enough for, true progressives, but the reality is, right now, Dungeons and Dragons is in the hands of the progressives. If you decolonize it, you have a very, very good chance that what you are going to really build is a new Dungeons and Dragons in the hands of some very unprogressive people. Now, I'm not saying that the Pathfinder people are unprogressive, but I do think they are way less progressive than the Dungeons and Dragons people. And I think if you go to colonized D&D, I actually don't think that's going to pump up Pathfinder. I think the Pathfinder community is shriveling right now, right? I think what you'll do is you will open up like a gap, and through that gap are going to be some people who will absolutely deliver a colonized D&D, and it's going to be very unprogressive, and I think they could get a ton of people playing it. And so I think it's actually quite dangerous to create a decolonized D&D under the D&D brand, right? And that's the other thing is we have it, right? Like we have a lot of decolonized Dungeons and Dragons games. Now, I also understand that progressives really want that decolonized Dungeons and Dragons under the Dungeons and Dragons banner. Totally get it. But I feel it's dangerous. I really feel it's dangerous. If you're not thankful for what you have, you can lose it, and you can create a situation that is way worse. Take a look at our current president. You don't mess around and overshoot the mark, right? Like sometimes you might win too much, right? And the whip back can be bad. I think decolonized D&D is a very, very bad idea. That's my opinion. I'm absolutely willing to be educated on this. Please let me know if you think I'm wrong on this below. If you think I'm right, I'd love to hear from you too. I'm really, cocking my ear for this one. I'm listening because I know this is a delicate subject, and I tried to treat this with respect and kindness for everybody involved in the discussion. And hopefully I accomplished that. If I didn't, please let me know so I can adjust, my own intellectual prowess as I kind of approach these more delicate subjects. I don't like to be silent on these things, and I think we should be able to have conversations, but we need to have them with respect and kindness, and that's what I'm trying to do. That's my opinion on decolonized D&D. Hard no. I would love to hear what you think. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.